Did you know a third tower fell on 9/11? That sign is today right above Times Square here in New York City. It was placed there through donations to a group called Rethink 9/11. It's a global campaign that spans from Australia to Canada, from San Francisco to right here in New York City. So what is Rethink 9/11? And candidly, wouldn't only fringe people still question what happened on 9/11? Well, perhaps not. Today we're going to release to you results of a brand new poll that show that more and more Americans are rethinking what happened on 9/11, and increasingly, more people are saying they do not believe the government's version of events. The first step toward truth is to be informed. Today here at Ground Zero in New York City, there stands a new North Tower, sometimes called the Freedom Tower, and a new Building 7, sitting approximately where the old Building 7 once stood. Americans have also promised to never forget what happened September 11th, 2001, along with the rest of the world. But to not forget does not mean that we do not rethink what we've been told. Rethink 9/11 is the first ever global 9/11 anniversary campaign, sponsored by a coalition of more than 40 organizations. Rethink 9/11 is placing ads in 11 major cities around the world this September 2013. According to architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, there is much to rethink when it comes to that rectangular building right there. That is the new Building 7. It stands a little bit smaller, but relatively where World Trade Center 7 once stood. That third building, the third to come down on September 11th, yet most people don't remember it. Now, to be clear, controversies about Building 7 have long been the source of fodder, if you will, for so-called conspiracy theorists. In 2008, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, released its long-awaited report on the collapse of World Trade Center 7. The lead investigator, Shyam Sunder, told journalists,
World Trade Center 7 collapsed because of fires fueled by office furnishings. It did not collapse from explosives or from fuel oil fires.
We really have a new kind of progressive collapse that we have discovered here, which is a fire-induced progressive collapse.
As of today, 2,000 professional architects and engineers from around the world have come out to say that the NIST claim that Building 7 came down as a result of simple office fires is not only untrue, it's not possible. What's more, that no skyscraper in history has ever come down that way. Take a look. The way Building 7 fell was without the building tipping or rocking. And that in order to fall like this, a building could only come down if all the internal columns supporting that building were to give way at the same time. Engineering is a technical field, but most of us would know this as a controlled demolition. To better understand the claims of architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, I talked with Tony Zambati, a mechanical design engineer with 27 years of experience in the aerospace and communications industries, and one of those 2,000 engineers calling for a new independent investigation into the collapse of Building 7 and the World Trade Center towers.
What a legitimate investigation would have done would have been to interrogate anybody who had access to those interiors. I'm not talking about office people, I'm talking about maintenance,
contractors,
security people, contractors, those type of people. That's never been done. That has never been done.
And I was going to ask you that too. Is that ultimately the goal here, is to get, I've heard, to get an independent investigation?
Yeah, well, I think our government is responsible to do that, although we would want it to be on board. And I don't believe the investigations done so far have been on board.
The claim from NIST, the final report that they released in 2008, I believe it was,
right,
says that that building collapsed as a result of office fires.
Right.
And you all say that's not only not true, it's not possible. Why is that?
It is not possible. The initial walk off of the girder is impossible, and I've done a finite element analysis of that, and I can show you in detail that it's impossible. The column buckling, column 79, that buckling is impossible, and the complete free fall is impossible in a natural collapse.
And there is another issue of how NIST says Building 7 came down. They say it was normal office fires, but the technical explanation for that floor beams expanded because of heat and ultimately pushed a single column, column 79, off its seating. NIST says that caused the entire collapse of the building. What NIST went on to say in that report in 2008 was that the reason that column was able to be pushed off of its seating was because they said the column was unrestrained. And yet it was discovered last year in 2012, after a Freedom of Information Act request was granted, that that NIST claim was not true. The columns were restrained. In fact, there were 3,896 shear studs holding those columns in place. So this has never happened. This would be the first time this has ever happened.
They say it's the first one that's ever happened yet.
It's ever happened.
They say thermal expansion caused it. When I say caused it, is they took out the complete core for 8 full stories. And that pulled in the exterior, and in a controlled demolition, when you have a core and an exterior, and you take the core out, it pulls in the exterior and it comes down.
What happens if you leave half of them? So if it's not a controlled demolition, if you just have a failure of half the columns,
you'd have a partial collapse.
Now, something else Tony's very passionate about is something called deceleration, and this goes back to the collapse of the World Trade Center North Tower. If you take a look at this video, you can see how the tower began to collapse. But Tony says this isn't possible because of something called deceleration. Look, the easiest way to explain it is like this. If you take a nail and you hit it with a hammer, the force that drives the nail into a block of wood is caused by the hammer. But at some point, the force actually pushes the hammer backward. That process is called deceleration. So again, look at this video. Here's how it should happen. As the top of the tower collapses, you should see a moment of impact where the force of the top floors falling pushes them upward. But that doesn't happen. As Tony says, you can see the building goes into free fall. There is no deceleration. So the professional challenge to the official story, again coming from 2,000 architects and engineers, is that the only way these buildings can go into free fall is through a controlled demolition, meaning the columns inside the building have to be wiped out first. Now, that's again the professional challenge. So how do families of 9/11 victims feel about this? Some may be offended by the call for a new investigation, but others are not. Bob McGilvain lost his son on 9/11.
First of all, Bob, thank you for sitting down with us. Tell us about your son. You said he worked for Merrill Lynch, and he went into work that morning, September 11th.
Bobby had just started Merrill Lynch. No one was able to get a hold of Bobby. The towers hit. You know, we weren't that worried because we knew he worked at Merrill Lynch. At least 150, I know 150 people called him that morning. No one ever got a response, but obviously the phone was working.
But he worked at Merrill Lynch, so why was he at the North Tower?
There was a seminar. So this is what we had figured. There was a seminar Merrill Lynch was sponsoring on the 106th floor that day.
For Bob, the most shocking thing about his son's death is that unlike most 9/11 families, Bob was able to recover parts of his son for burial. And he actually received a cause of death from the coroner.
I finally got up to the morgue, talked to the doctor who examined him. Now, no matter how you look at it, he got hit by a sudden force.
Based on the fact that he was impacted by something.
Something, yeah, a force.
Yes.
Yeah, some sort of force.
Okay.
So, because top of his head was taken out, his right arm was blown off.
And his body had lacerations.
Lacerations. So I finally came to the conclusion, well, he didn't go to work, so obviously he decided to go to the 106th floor. Now everyone's thinking, well, was he up in the 106th floor? And he said, well, no, he didn't jump. He wouldn't have those kind of injuries. He had a compound fracture on the one leg, right? But the injuries weren't, and we would have, if he was on the 106th floor, we would have heard from him too. Because a lot of people were calling out on the 106th floor because they weren't hit by the plane. So they were trying to figure out how to get out of there. So then reading, and I left you in a pamphlet, the oral histories of one firefighter. He came in, this firefighter, and it's from these oral histories that I came to this conclusion. He walked into the west side, and his description, everything was blown out. The louver doors going in. And in the center of the center of the building, all these elevators were blown out. And finally in 2007, I got the guts to call up New York and said, look, I want to find out what happened to my son.
According to Bob and the autopsy he showed us, his son Bobby was not killed by being burned. In fact, the burns his son received came after he died.
So the planes had nothing to do with his death. And I really could prove that in a court of law easily. So therefore, if the planes had nothing to do with his death, who killed him?
Well, the claims made by both Bob and Tony are compelling, to say the least. But where is the American public on this issue? A newly commissioned poll shows that in the 12 years since 9/11, there may be growing skepticism when it comes to the official story on 9/11. According to that poll, 38% of Americans have doubts about the official account of 9/11, and 10% do not believe it at all. That's compared to only 40% who are completely satisfied. And there is more, because when you start asking questions specifically about Building 7, the public is even more skeptical. 46% suspect or are sure that it was a controlled demolition, compared to 28% who say fires. That, again, the official story. 27% don't know. And of those polled, the largest group, 41%, support a new investigation of Building 7's collapse. Again, what architects and engineers is calling for, compared to 22% who oppose it. Well, back here in Times Square, and what you need to know is that to rethink 9/11, some would say, is unpatriotic. Others would say is conspiratorial. But increasingly, those folks are in the minority. It's amazing how far we've come in 12 years. And consider this, despite what this campaign is all about, to rethink 9/11 is about much more than just September 11th, 2001. Over the past 12 years, every civil and constitutional right that's been taken from Americans has been done so in the name of security. Our right to due process, our freedom of speech, our right to our personal effects, the right to privacy, all of it taken as part of the global war on terror in the name of security. Now, we can have an argument about whether or not today we are more secure. But one thing that is beyond argument is whether or not today we are more free. To rethink 9/11 means that we still have the right to question those who have taken our rights, how they've taken them, and why. And that is Reality Check. Well, now that you've been informed, it's time to get engaged. Go right now to benswann.com. There you're going to find the story where you can view it again, as well as the text of the story and the sources that we have used. Also, if you would like to help us create more episodes just like this one, you can do so by clicking on the Contribute tab on the right-hand side of the screen. benswann.com. Get engaged right now.